And hey, it's 17 minutes past 4. It is that time of day for Creation Ministries International, and we've got Dr. John in the studio. Good afternoon, Dr. John.
Good afternoon, Mick. Yeah, and Mick, I'm fascinated that you've just read out that story about the movie.
Yeah.
Because I'm actually going to talk about that sort of thing this afternoon. It's amazing. I mean, that's what the Lord led me to prepare today. So, yeah, it's going to fit in really, really nicely.
Good. Life after death. Well, by the way, if anyone has any questions, please send them through to us, to our text line. Just SMS 0401 949 949. Well, tell us more, Dr. John.
Yeah, well, look, as our listeners know, the regular ones, what we often discuss in this segment is the world's opinion about scientific issues versus the Bible's opinion about those issues. Mm-hmm. And we discuss the various interpretations of the evidence and whatever. And the average listener can say, yeah, well, look, I've heard those different interpretations, but, after all, that's your opinion, and we've got the opinion of the secular scientific world. But how can I know which is right, whose opinion's correct? Because they both sound pretty good. And, I mean, that's what a debate is all about, two sides giving a different interpretation of the same story. And the audience, in the case of us here, it's our listeners, they get to make up their minds which interpretation or opinion sounds best. Mm-hmm. But that's not really good enough, because we don't want to know what sounds best. We want to know which opinion is the truth.
Yep.
Right? And I heard Pat Mesiti once make a great comment. He said, as Christians, we're not to debate, we are to declare, because what we're saying, we believe, is the truth. And that's what I want to do this afternoon, to declare on the basis of authority. And that authority is Jesus Christ himself. Mm-hmm. Because when he was on earth, the comment made about him was that he spoke as one with authority. He didn't talk like the religious leaders who'd say, so-and-so says this and so-and-so says that, and you could then make up your own mind. But he said what he said, and he said it with authority. And the interesting thing about that movie you're talking about, the two leading groups, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, they had different opinions about a resurrection. And what I think that really means is that they had different opinions about life after death. Mm-hmm. Because the Pharisees believed that there was life after death, but the Sadducees didn't. They thought, well, when you're dead, and that's it. Mm-hmm. Right? But Jesus wasn't anything like that. He said, this is how it is. It's not a matter for debate. And anyone disputing what he says, I reckon, is really standing against the greatest authority figure who ever lived. You're arguing with the Creator himself. Yep. So I want to have a look today at some of the things that Jesus said and compare them with what the world is telling us we should believe. Mm-hmm. And we know that the world says that this earth and the entire universe is a chance happening. There was a big bang. Everything we see came about from a condensation of swirling dust and, all of that sort of stuff. That dust and gas coming together by gravity formed the planets and the sun and the moon and, our whole solar system. And there's thousands, supposedly even millions of other solar systems like ours out there. And, Earth is nothing special and so on. And they also believe that at some later stage, after a few billion years, when everything's settled, by chance a few atoms formed some molecules, and then by chance the earliest life forms came, and progressively those early life forms evolved into the multitude of life forms that we see on Earth today, and it formed all the different animals, and it formed us, and we came from all those different animals. Mm-hmm. That's what the secular scientific view says. And they also believe that the material world is all there is. They reckon there's no fifth dimension like a spirit world, certainly no life after death for humanity. The secular world would not accept that. But what we've usually done on the program is give the biblical view of creation rather than evolution or whatever, both for the formation of the universe and the creation of animals and man. But what I want to do today is look at what Jesus himself said. Because if you want to argue with him, you're taking on the greatest authority figure who ever walked the planet, and that's pretty serious. And effectively, he also said that you're going to get a personal interview with him after you die. Now, that's pretty scary, right? So, it might be a good idea to know what he said while he was on earth. And if we think about what he said about life after death, there were the two different views amongst the Pharisees and the Sadducees, but they were all Jews, and Jesus himself was a Jew, and they all regarded themselves as being the descendants of Abraham. Didn't matter whether they believed in life after death or not. But Jesus, when he spoke to the Sadducees who didn't believe in life after death, he was particularly critical of them because he said, you don't understand either the scriptures or the power of God. And he said, they all knew that they were descendants of Abraham and then descendants of Abraham's son Isaac and then his grandson Jacob. And Jesus said to them, that the scripture says, God says, I'm the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Jesus said, he's not the God of the dead, he's the God of the living. So he said, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, although they are dead, they're still in existence. And one of his criticisms of the people who opposed him was he said, you're not going to sit down at dinner in the afterlife with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and all the prophets. The people who believe, and as you don't believe, they're the ones who are going to sit down with them. So there's no doubt that Jesus talked about life after death, and there's no doubt also that he believed that. And of course, the perfect proof of all that was he came back from the dead himself after he died. Now, that is the greatest perfect demonstration of the truth of life after death that you could possibly have. One man, Jesus, did come back to life after he died. So I think, although that film is probably going to be a great film, and it's going to be talking about people's experiences of they've probably died and they've had an experience of the afterlife, and they've come back and they've talked about it. Yep. But that's not. They're interesting stories, but that's not the proof. The proof really is Jesus himself, what he believed and what he did. So that's it's interesting that movie has come up today, because that's the first of Jesus' authority beliefs that I wanted to discuss today. So there you go.
Yeah, well, there is a lot of people that have obviously passed over and then come back again, and that's what the movie's about. They tell their stories. I've watched the shorts. But, of course, Jesus, that was the greatest life after death ever. Interesting, though, as you were speaking then, I was thinking, you're talking about, science and what they're looking for, and they're spending billions of dollars looking into outer space, looking at other planets, looking at different areas of science to try and disprove God, but they're not spending anything to try and prove he's there. Yet it's interesting how, the major religions that aren't Christianity, they still believe Jesus existed. Of course, Christianity, we have the evidence in the Bible of what he said. And just interesting that man is trying so hard to find something else, yet it's right in front of them.
Well, yeah, that's right. But of course, if they look right in front of them and see the truth there, then that means there's a requirement for them to accept that truth. Yes. And then bow the knee to Jesus himself. And that's what they don't want to do. Yeah. So that's why all this effort and all this money is spent on looking into outer space to see if you can find the explanation for life on Earth out there, when really it's right here.
Yeah, it's easier to live a bad lifestyle without accepting Christ, isn't it? You are on 94.9. It is 28 minutes past 4. We've got Newsboys up now. Love one another, and we'll be back with Dr. John from Creation Ministries International very soon. If you have any questions for Dr. John, please send them through to our text line. SMS 0401 949 949. And you're on 94.9. It's 23 minutes to 5. And we have Dr. John in the studio from Creation Ministries International. He's been talking to us about the authority of Jesus. And I mentioned before, there's other religions like the Muslims, the Hindus, Baha'is. They all believe Jesus existed. They talk about Jesus, and we all know Jesus well. He's our saviour, and he said a lot of things. And, the fact that he is our God, we have to, I guess, accept what he said as being, well, number one, nothing beats it.
Well, that's right, Mick. And of course, the other religions, although they believe he existed, they don't see that he had quite the same authority as we see. But we do, And
but they believe he was there. It's not like they've denied he existed.
No, they wouldn't deny his existence. But
they even think that he was a very smart guy and he was, very religious. And, it's interesting what they do believe about him.
That's right. But, of course, we believe that when he addresses a particular issue, then he knew what he was talking about.
Absolutely.
And I think right from the beginning, if you're talking about the creation of humanity, the Bible tells us that the first two people on earth were Adam and Eve. Mm-hmm. Well, did Jesus mention Adam and Eve? No, he didn't actually mention them by name, but he did talk about the murder of Abel by Cain. Mm-hmm. Okay, so Cain and Abel were brothers, and they had to have parents, and so I think it's a pretty safe bet that Jesus accepted that the parents of Cain and Abel were Adam and Eve, even though he didn't mention them by name. But he also says that God, and talking about creation, God at the beginning of creation made humanity male and female. Mm-hmm. And he said, for this reason, a man leaves his father and mother, cleaves to his wife, and so on. Mm-hmm. So he also said that marriage is between a man and a woman. Mm-hmm. So, there's people who want to argue about that now, but that's really what Jesus said. Yep. And I think he's the one who has really the greatest authority. But interestingly enough, he said he made them male and female, only two genders.
Yeah.
Now, there's a lot of people who want to add a few more genders than just two, but I think they're going to be arguing with Jesus over that one. So I think we can safely say that Jesus declares that it is a creation. It's not an evolution. It's not a chance happening. That it was just the two genders, male and female, and that marriage is between a man and a woman. Mm-hmm. And anybody who wants to argue, they can argue with Jesus, and they're going to get the opportunity to do that. Mm-hmm. So I think that's very interesting. But the next thing that I thought was fascinating, really, was the thing that the secular world denies, and that is a global flood. Now, Jesus was pretty adamant that there was a global flood, and when he's talking about the end of this particular present age, he uses Noah and the flood as an example. And he says how, before the flood, they were eating, drinking, they were giving in marriage, they were marrying, and then the day that Noah entered the ark, then the flood came and destroyed them all. Mm-hmm. So he's pretty clear that he believed in the global flood of Noah. Mm-hmm. And then after the flood, we get the story of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. I think there's a very interesting thing about this, because he says, as it was in the days of Lot, they ate, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted, they built. But the day that Lot walked out of Sodom, then fire and brimstone rained down from heaven and destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. Mm. Now, he doesn't. He certainly believes that was historical truth. Mm-hmm. He doesn't comment on the reason for the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, which the Bible tells us about. But it's a pretty sure bet, I reckon, that he would believe what the Bible has said as being the thing that triggered that. Mm-hmm. But I thought it was very interesting the comparison of what he said about Noah and the flood, and the comparison with Lot and Sodom and Gomorrah. Because remember that Noah was before the flood. Yep. Sodom and Gomorrah was after the flood. Now, I've often said on this program that I think the Bible indicates that there was a very different climate before the flood and after the flood. Mm-hmm. That was the event that brought about the greatest climate change on Earth.
Yeah.
Now, interestingly enough, he says about Noah that they were eating, drinking, marrying, and giving in marriage. But when he talks about Sodom and Gomorrah, he says they ate, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted, they built. So they did sort of different things before the flood and after the flood. Mm. And we know that after the flood they had a go at building the Tower of Babel and so on. So it sounds as though there might have been a few different things the way the earth ran after the flood than it ran before the flood.
Yeah.
After the flood, Noah plants his vineyard and he gets drunk on the wine. He didn't plant the vineyard before the flood.
Yeah.
So what was it about the conditions on earth before the flood that were very, very different from after the flood? The Bible doesn't specifically say that it didn't rain before the flood, mm-hmm. but it's pretty certain that there wasn't a rainbow before the flood, because that was God's sign after the flood. So, yeah, I think we can say that there were very, very different conditions before the flood and after the flood. Mm-hmm. After the flood, the climate is very much as we know it today.
Yeah.
But there's another great story, of course, that Jesus addresses, and that's the one that people scoff at. That's the story of Jonah and the big fish.
Yes, in the whale, yeah.
I mean, there's no doubt that he believed that was true, that Jonah, before he went and preached to the Ninevites, he was thrown into the sea, swallowed by the fish, and he was in the belly of the fish for 3 days. Mm-hmm. Now, he must have believed that story, because he used that as a comparison for the 3 days that he was going to be in the tomb. Mm-hmm. So there's no doubt that Jesus authenticates the story of Jonah. So I think you'd be a pretty brave person to argue with him
yes.
over that. And then the next one, I suppose, is the existence of spirit beings, which the secular world doesn't believe. You know, mm-hmm. it only believes in atoms and molecules and whatever. And certainly nothing like a spirit dimension and spirit beings like angels and demons. But Jesus clearly believed in both of them and mentions them. And he spent a lot of his healing ministry speaking to the demons that were controlling people and telling them to get out, you know. So, and they always did because of the authority that rested in him.
Yes.
So, yeah, I think we can say that he definitely believed in the spirit realm. And what about Judgment Day? That's another one, and I think the best Old Testament description of Judgment Day we find in chapter 7 of the book of Daniel, where it talks about God as the Ancient of Days comes to get seated on the throne. And then all the books are opened, and then one like the Son of Man comes on the clouds of heaven and receives the kingdom. Well, when Jesus was brought before the high priests and so on, he applied that description to himself. He said, "You'll see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven," and of course they then said to him, "Well, yeah, that's just utter blasphemy. You've applied that to yourself." And that was the reason why the chief priests wanted to crucify him. Because they said he was blaspheming. He was making himself out to be God himself and this Son of Man who was receiving the kingdom. So, yeah, I think the areas in which the secular scientists and the scoffers and the unbelievers disagree with the Bible, they're the ones that Jesus addresses. And he really puts his stamp of authority on them. So I reckon it'd be a pretty brave or foolhardy person to want to argue with him, especially when you know that you're going to get a personal interview. We're all going to stand before him and give an account of what we've done. And he's also going to be the judge and jury. You know, he says how he's going to sit there and he'll put the sheep on his right hand and the goats on his left hand, and the sheep will go with him into eternity, but the goats will go off into a nasty place.
Yes, yes. We don't want to go that way.
No, we don't want to go that way. So really, I think the issue of Jesus having the authority and knowing exactly what he was talking about is a very big one, and would do us, we'd be pretty wise to believe him, I reckon.
Absolutely. Be nice to see governments of the day putting a bit of money into maybe just researching how it's right rather than looking elsewhere. Anyway, that happens. Thank you, Dr. John. Another awesome week, and we'll be catching up with you, I believe, in about 4 weeks' time.
Yeah, 3 or 4 weeks. But look, before I finish today, Mick, I want to say I know your annual appeal is coming up here at Rima, and I just want to say on behalf of Creation Ministries, what a privilege we believe we have to have been invited onto this radio station, you know, and to be able to put out on the airwaves the sort of things that we put out, and how privileged people are on the Central Coast to have a Christian radio station like Rima that's prepared to stand up for biblical truth. I think that's absolutely fantastic, and I would personally like to thank Rima on behalf of everybody on the Central Coast. I think we owe you a great debt of gratitude.
Oh, thank you, Dr. John. Well, hopefully that will help during our appeal as well, which is very close. A lot more coming up about that very soon. And thank you again for another awesome week.
Okay, Mick. Well, I'll see you in a few weeks' time.
Awesome. You're on 94.9. It is 10 minutes to 5.